Okay, guys, it's 5:30, so we can start the last talk of the second day of Salesforce Summit 2021. And we're switching to English right now because joining us is Štepán Ružička, that is, I think, joining us from Prague. Is it correct? Štepán, I think you need to turn on your microphone because you're muted. And
Okay,
yeah, we can hear you.
Perfect.
Hi, Guy. Just let me before you start. Just let me introduce you. Štepán Ružička is a Salesforce and MuleSoft enthusiast, leading the development team at Musa. He believes the sky is the limit, and no matter what you do, whether it's climbing up 5,000-meter hill in Uganda or at your daily job, 10 times certified Salesforce expert with years of experience and skills in development and enterprise-level projects, integration, data migration, DevOps, telco, and more. And today, Štepán is going to tell us about Salesforce data migration challenges and how to overcome them. If you have such challenges, if you guys have any questions to our speaker, please be sure to leave them in the comments down below or at the side of your screen, depending on which streaming service you guys are using. We're waiting for your questions that we'll try to pass to our speaker at the end of his talk in a Q&A section. So Štepán, welcome to Salesforce Summit 2021.
Okay, thank you very much. So first of all, let me welcome you to Salesforce 2021 as well. Hopefully you can see me, hear me. Unfortunately, I can't see you, but hopefully you can do. Yeah, please. So hopefully this is probably the last presentation for today, but hopefully not least. So let me introduce first of all myself. As was already mentioned, I'm technical architect and developer lead from Musa Inspire. I've got 10 years experience in IT, 6 experience in Salesforce. I'm 12 times certified, Salesforce certified, I mean. I've got rich experience in DevOps, data migration, integration, and also telco industry. I spent also 4 years in telco company. Okay, so the topic for today is called Salesforce files, migration challenges, and how to overcome them. So first of all, briefly to the agenda. So I will try to describe you the business case, what we are trying to cover in this presentation. Which requires also a bit of theory, because without that I wouldn't be probably able to explain you what the challenges are and what the possible solutions are, of course. So this will take approximately half an hour, and then I will try to present you a demo, which will take approximately 10 minutes. And we will have some spare time for your questions and potentially for my answers, if I'm able to answer them. Okay, so what the topic is. So basically, the business case I'm going to talk about is very typical, very common scenario when a customer wants to merge 2 Salesforce orgs. It typically involves data migration of records, and by records I mean standard objects such as accounts, opportunities, cases, but also files, which will be our main focus for today. So the main goal is basically to give you an overview of challenges which are linked to this topic, and how to overcome them. So probably this scene might be familiar to you. I hope the majority of you is, or at least some of the related list of, because this is a detailed page of records. It can be an account, for example, And yeah, there are 3 related lists which all cover files. Okay, I mean files with lower f, because Salesforce files is a special term, which is special technology basically. But by Salesforce files, I mean content objects and attachments, nodes, and enhanced nodes potentially. So the first related list is the classical nodes and attachments list. So those who work with Salesforce for some time already, they probably remember it from Salesforce Classic environment. So which is with Salesforce for a long time already. Whereas files and nodes, I mean enhanced nodes, it's something newer basically. It's a modern way how to manage files. Okay, so why Salesforce files were introduced? Because managements, they did their work, of course, and they still do, right? Because you can still use nodes and attachments, even though it's not recommended. It's probably better to switch to Salesforce files, because one day, probably that day is not defined yet, but nodes and attachments will retire. Nodes and attachments, they were not that flexible as the modern time requires, right? And needed to evolve somehow, which basically brings Salesforce files technology. So it's a new era of document management in Salesforce. And what it offers compared to nodes and attachments is, for example, you can share files with users, groups, records without all attachment permission. You can share files with multiple users and records. You can upload files up to 2 gigabytes compared to 25 megabytes for attachment. 65 megabytes for attachment. If you created a case against Salesforce, they could activate a bigger file for you, but still 65 megabytes compared to 2 gigabytes is something completely different. So by its nature, it supports version control, collaboration via chat feed. You can preview files, and it's optimized for Lightning. What does that mean is that classic attachments, if you switch to Lightning, you won't be able to search them in the global search. Of course, Salesforce files you can search. So what's the difference? So as you can see, there were just 2 objects, one for nodes, one for attachments. So the data model, it got slightly more complicated, and these objects are replaced by multiple objects. I haven't listed all of them, but I think the most important, they are there. So it is content document, content version, content document link, content node, which is kind of, I will try to explain you on the slide later on. Okay, so let's have a look at the data model here. So this is how attachment nodes could be related to an object. So as you can see, there is just one lookup field on the attachment, one lookup field on the node, and that means that it could have just one relationship to one record, no multiple records. Okay. Here you can see the data model for content object. And I will try to tell you a bit more about these. So probably the most important. Well, they are all important, but content document represents the file itself. Content version, because the file can have multiple versions. So content version is obviously one version of the document. Only one version can be the active one, which is given by a flag. And to be able to relate the content document, there is a content document link, which is for more technical people, it's a junction object, and it's basically many-to-many relationship, and that's basically the object which allows us to relate the content document file to multiple objects, because you can have as many as you want content document links. Yeah, there is one. There are some, I would say, content object specifics and limitations. In combination with this complex data model, it creates those challenges I was talking about at the very beginning. So, for example, there is a limitation from Salesforce to query content document object or content version directly. So if you want to get a list of all content documents, content versions, you won't be able to do that. You need to specify an ID in the query, or you can specify more than one ID. Right? You can specify a set of IDs in the where clause if you want to query them, which is okay. But there's another limitation, which is number of character limit for the query, which is 10,000 characters. And you can imagine that if you have thousands of records, you won't be able to put all the IDs into the query, right? So you need to switch. You need to split it into batches of sets of IDs, and that's basically how you can query those objects. Okay. Yeah, so this is basically I forgot to mention one important thing. So as you can see, the diagram on the top is pretty much the same as the bottom, and the top one is it describes the file. The bottom one, it describes the node, and the only difference is that file extension is set to S node value. So if you want to filter just nodes, you need to specify that in your query, and you need to query for records with file extension S node. Okay. Yeah. So when you want to migrate, so let's assume that you have two orgs, source org and target org, and you want to migrate those files. So as we said, there are classic attachments, and there are Salesforce files. So in ideal case, there will be just content objects, so Salesforce files. If the org is not that old and the company started to use content objects from the beginning, right? But in most of the cases, it's not the case. So you need to somehow deal with that, and there's a couple of options how to do that. So the first option. So I have depicted just two options, but there is more than that, I would say. But first option would be to migrate attachments to attachments. Another option and content objects to content objects. Another option would be to migrate attachments into content objects and content objects to content objects. So you end up with just Salesforce files in the target org. And there are two more options. what you can do, you can convert attachments to content objects in the source org, and then migrate just content objects. Or the last option is to migrate attachments and content objects to attachments. But I wouldn't recommend that, even though I've seen some guides on the internet. Some people were trying to guide other people to do it this way, maybe for its simplicity, but I think it's not a good idea, because you can lose some data. You need some additional transformation, some mapping between attachment and content version, and of course you can relate the file just to one record. So in case you have content objects related to multiple objects, this is not the right solution. Okay, so typical data migration steps are export is the first step. Then you need to somehow map, filter, transform, potentially enrich the data, and upload them to target org. Okay, so you can use a variety of tools for that. You can use, for example, Talent. You can use Excel spreadsheet, which I wouldn't recommend, but yeah, it's heavily used in the industry. But yeah, you need to, in order to use Excel spreadsheet, you would have to use multiple VLOOKUPs, and in case of content objects, where there's multiple objects and multiple relations between them, I think you can easily get lost in it, and you can you can get into some problems. Of course, you can also use MuleSoft, even though it's not like the first purpose of this platform to do that, or any other ETL tool. And you can use some your custom scripts, Java apps, etc. Okay, so how to export data? Okay, so well, you cannot use data loader, because data loader it cannot export binary data such as attachments and content versions. But you can use standard Salesforce functionality, export files. You can export files using this functionality. So you find it in setup, data management, data export now. Don't forget to check this checkbox includes images, documents, and attachments, and include Salesforce files. And of course, you need to select content version, content document link, and note. There are some limitations, such as you can. So when you basically run the export now, it may take a couple of hours. It may take also a couple of days, and potentially a couple of weeks, because Salesforce doesn't guarantee anything. It usually happens in a couple of hours, but yeah, if you for example forget to check one of those checkboxes, then you need to wait another 48 hours since the last export was exported. Yeah, so it doesn't mean that it counts 48 hours since you pressed this button, but basically since the export was ready for you. You get a notification, and then you can download files. But again, there's a limitation for the size of the file. So in case there's data which exceeds, I think it's around 500 megabytes. So Salesforce will split the content into multiple files. So you can end up with tens of files and downloading one by one. So I think that's probably I wanted to say in regards to this. Yeah, maybe one more thing. So as I said, the time to completion is not guaranteed by this Salesforce export. Yeah, and the content of those archives you download is basically the CSV file and binary data. Binary data, I mean, basically files, yeah, but they are not named by their original name because, of course, you can have multiple files with the same names, and they will be overwritten. Part of the archive is a batch file, Windows batch file, which you can run, and it would rename files to their original names, but again, if there are files with the same name, it won't work. Yeah. So this is it I wanted to say. And okay, so there's time to demo. Okay, so I have prepared the demo for you. I've created two demo orgs. They are Scratch orgs, and the first one of them it has got nodes and attachments and files and nodes, and the other one is obviously empty. And I would like to show you script I prepared for this purpose, and I will provide you with those. I've created public repository for you, so you can access it. You can. I'm pretty sure you will be able to Google it. So, or I will send you the link somehow. So, if you look for Musa Inspire Salesforce file export import, you will be able to find those. So these scripts are written in Python. I don't want to go into details, but basically you have all the instructions you need to make them up and running. So yeah, obviously you need to install Python. I have tested it with version 3.8.7, but it doesn't mean it won't work with other versions. I mean, especially 3.x. Yeah, I think it would work with those as well. Okay, so there are some installation instructions as well, so you can follow these to install it. And yeah, so there is basically four Python scripts: export attachment, upload attachment, export content version, and upload content version. So I will demo these two, okay, just to show you how simple it is to migrate files with using those two scripts. And basically, what are the advantages compared to standard Salesforce export is that because typically when you migrate some records, you've got some selection criteria. You don't want to migrate all accounts, all opportunities, because maybe because of some data quality as well, or maybe those data, they are not needed anymore. So when you migrate to another org, it's the right time to get rid of those records and archive them somewhere. Which means that if you would export all the files using the standard Salesforce functionality, you would have to somehow filter records you don't want by records you are migrating. So, for example, if you would migrate 10,000 records, 10,000 account records out of 200,000 records, you would have to remove them from the results CSV file, and also delete those binary data from the folder, from the archive. Using those scripts, you don't need to do that. So basically, it's easy to run them, because the first parameter is the query for the parent object. So in terms of account, you can put any where clause you want. I don't have any where clause here, but I think that's okay in the example. So let's say we want to migrate all files related to account, and also probably you don't want to create because if you have a file in the source org related to multiple records, probably you don't want to migrate the same file 5 times and create it 5 times in the target org. So you need something to be able to find out that you already have migrated that file, which is some external ID typically. Okay, so yeah, but I will get to that. Yeah, so basically what you need to do, you need to provide the script with the query of the parent object, and then you need to provide it with some configuration file, which is nothing but Salesforce connection, basically Salesforce credentials. So you can create as many configuration files as you want for each environment where you want to test, or or for production as well, of course. You need to specify where you want to generate those files, where you want to store those files and the CSV files, results CSV files, and you need to specify if you want to include nodes or not. Okay, so this is how it looks like for the export. Okay, so I will switch to terminal. Hopefully you won't disconnect right now, because from my experience, when someone sees the terminal, they don't want to see it anymore. But hopefully that's okay with you. So I have prepared some commands here. So I will explain it to you. So as I said, this is the script name. This is the configuration file, which is the first demo org, the source, and this is the query, and this is the folder where everything will be stored. Okay, so if I run it, it will tell me there's just 2 files. Okay, so I can also show it to you in the org again. So as you can see, there are not 2 files, but 1 file and one node. And by default, the script takes the node as well. So as I already mentioned, nodes are stored in the same way as files, with just the file extension difference. Okay, so what it created is the same structure you would get using this standard Salesforce export functionality, but of course it is filtered by the parent record. So as you can see, there is a CSV file for content document link, which is the relation between the record and the file content version itself. And if we open it, yeah, so as you can see, there are two binary files named by the content version ID. Okay. So now, if we want to upload it to the target org, we just run another script, the upload content versions, and there are a few more parameters we need to specify. So first of all, first is the upsert key. It's the custom field external ID, which uniquely identifies the record from the source org. So in other words, basically, if you upload the file twice, it will be just updated based on this ID. Okay. Yeah, so this is again Salesforce credentials for the target org. This is the content version CSV we have seen, and this is the path to content version files, the binary data. Okay, so if I run it, you will get an output like this. So if the error is empty, then it's good. If you would get an error message, you would have to investigate what happened. Yeah, typically, because this is updating also audit fields, such as last modified dates, created date. Yeah, so you need to enable setting audit fields. Okay, so now we can go to the target org and see whether we have them migrated. Yes, as you can see, there are 2 files, and we can also see the you won't see it here. Yeah, actually, you cannot. I forgot to mention one important thing. You cannot create an external ID on content document object. You can do that on content version. Okay, so which slightly complicates this thing, but I will get back to it after this demo, and I will explain you details of that. Okay, so now content document links. I don't have any script for that, but I don't think it's needed, right? Basically, what you need to do is that the original content document link, I will show you, it contains 2 important fields. One of them is linked entity ID. Okay, let me. Okay, one is content document ID, and another one is linked entity ID. Okay, the content document ID is the original ID which we need to replace by the content document ID from the target org. Linked entity ID is the account, right? So it's the account ID, and we also need to replace it by the ID from the target org. So we can easily do that for linked entity ID by the external ID. For content document ID, it's slightly bit more complicated because content document objects records are created automatically once you create content version. So what you need to do is you need to query the content version, which contains also content document ID, and you need to basically get the mapping of the original content document ID and the target content document ID in order to be able to update these content document IDs in content document link. I hope it's understandable. Okay, so for content document link data migration, I recommend to use Talent, but for this purpose, for today, I just created, I just wrote a bit of Apex to do that, to make it faster. Okay, so if I run it, because right now you won't be able to see them on the detail page, of course, because we don't have content document links migrated. Okay, so we cannot see anything yet, even though we have migrated those content versions and content documents. But after I run this, they should appear on the migrated account. Okay, so as you can see, we have them there. Okay, yeah, so I've got a couple of more slides. which describe how you need to deal with content document links. Okay, so basically, as I already mentioned, you need to get content versions from the source org. Then you need to export content versions from the target org, match those records based on the source external ID, and get the mapping file, which can be a CSV file, simple CSV file where there's source org ID, target org ID. Then you can use that file to replace the original content document ID with the target document ID. Okay. For linked entity ID, you can just easily, if you use Talent, you can just query the ID in the target org, and you can easily replace it in one step. Basically, you don't need two steps, but one step is enough. Yes, and I guess that's all from my side. I've got a list of useful links if you want to know more about this topic. And yeah, I've got a few more slides which you might find useful if you want to, for example, activate enhanced nodes and attachments as Salesforce files. Yeah, so basically, you can use the classic related list for classic attachments, nodes and attachments, and you can upload if you click on upload attachment, it will behave the same, but the result will be different, and you will upload attachment as a Salesforce file, basically. I mentioned that it is possible to convert nodes and attachments into Salesforce files. For that, you can use a free App Exchange app, which is called Magic Mover, or there is also a repository which is basically Apex, some Apex app on GitHub, and you can use that to run it and migrate also to Salesforce files. I mean, by migration, I mean it's in the context of one org, right? Not org to org. Yes, and I think there is now right time for questions and answers.
Hello again, and here we have some questions sent to us. One of them is more of a technical nature, and the other one is about finding a job. So maybe we'll start from the technical aspect. I need to migrate my Box Salesforce data into Azure Blob Storage. What is the best solution with automation? What do you think?
Yeah, how do you need to migrate it? Do you need to migrate it on a daily basis, or is it just one-time migration? Because I think the approach would be different. But yeah, probably I have done this in the past, so I can tell you how I did it. So we used MuleSoft, which is an ETL tool, which ran on daily basis and which checked for updated files, and it exported them and stored them as a blobs to Azure storage. So please let me know if that answer satisfies you, or if you need to know more details about that.
Great. So we'll be asking for waiting for a follow-up question. Maybe we managed to get some more details. And then we have this one. Could you do interview questions, as I could not find many interview questions for data migration? Do you know any typical job interview questions?
Well, I think there can be like tens of them, but probably I would ask what are the typical steps of data migration? How would you check that the migration was successful, right? I would expect that one of the answers would be reconciliation reports, right? So basically, what it means is that you prepare report on one side, on the source org, report on the target org, and after the data migration is completed, you run them both, and numbers on both sides need to match, basically. Yeah, and yeah, sometimes it can be a bit tricky because sometimes you migrate two objects into one, or other way around, you migrate one object into two, right? So you need to consider it in your reports. So that could be also one question. Yes. So maybe I would ask what needs to be done before the data migration. Yeah, so I think typically what needs to be done. So you need to deduplicate the data before you migrate them. You need to cleanse them because in the target org probably you will have different validation rules because maybe there are more business processes than it used to be in the source org. So you need to accommodate the data to the form which is expected on the target org. Otherwise, the data migration will fail. And also, how would you test data migration, right? Because you cannot just prepare something and go and run it to production, because some changes, they are not reversible. Yeah, so once you create something, you may not be able to delete that and run it again later on. Yeah, because in some cases you may have some triggers which are fired and they update other records, related records. Yeah. Yeah. Also, if you have big volume data, yeah, so in such case, you need to make sure that the data are in good quality, and they would pass validation rules and all the validation basically, because in that case you want probably deactivate triggers which would delay whole the process, because the data migration typically is done during the weekend, and during the weekend you have basically 2 days only to complete the data migration. So everything needs to run on minutes basis, right? The schedule needs to be. The schedule is very tight, and sometimes the weekend is not enough, depending on how many objects you migrate, how many records you migrate. Okay, so yeah, so hopefully this answer is satisfying as well.
Thank you very much. And another question from our very active user today, a very active viewer. It's Eva, who asks, you mentioned data enrichment. How do you approach it, and why mentioned it in this context?
Yeah, so for example, by enrichment, I mean it can be also called transformation, let's say, yeah? Or maybe you want to for some records which meet some criteria, you want to add some additional information. Yeah? So you want to populate a field by some default value, for example, or you want to enrich them by some information from different system because you want to turn off that system. Yeah. So that's what enrichment means.
Great. And I think this concludes our Q&A section, as I don't see any other questions in our comments section. So I guess this is it. Thank you so much, Štepán, for attending our conference, Salesforce Summit 2021. And we appreciate your time that you decided to spend with us. Oh, there's another question. Do you have some time for just one more question? Would you like to answer it?
Yeah, sure, of course.
Patrick asks, did you try migrating email messages using talent And if yes, did you encounter any challenges?
Yes, yeah. When I was preparing this topic, I was also thinking about email message migration, because it has a lot of challenges, of course, and yeah, you need to know how email messages work, because some email messages are linked to tasks, and basically you need to consider a lot of information. Probably it would be for another session. I wouldn't be able to cover it now in the answer.
Okay, so it seems like it's a great idea for another talk in the future. So maybe we can arrange another talk during S4 Summit, the next edition. It seems like a great topic. And Patrick says thanks. Likes are coming right now from people who say thank you for your talk. So I think this is it. Thank you so much. And let me just add that. Let me just remind you that if you enter our site open.s4summit.pl, you can find Musa also in their virtual stand, and you can ask them questions. You can submit your CVs, and you can also talk to our speakers even more in the Q&A section. So please be sure to check it out. Now, once again, Štepán, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining this session. Hopefully you find it useful, and yeah, if you have any additional questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me, and I will be more than happy to answer. And also, please check the GitHub repository and feel free to test my script. And if you find some issue, also report it, and I will try to fix it for you.
Thanks again, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.